I'm Kestrel Davenport, a wildlife vet who survived the first 30 days of the Ice Age apocalypse. When temperatures plummeted to 80-degree outward, I watched society collapse around me. 27 of us were trapped at Yellowstone Wildlife Center with dwindling supplies, but my experience with predators taught me one crucial truth: adapt or die. This is how I kept 17 people alive when the world froze solid. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. My name is Kestrel Davenport. Before everything changed, I was just a trauma veterinarian at Yellowstone Wildlife Center. I specialized in treating dangerous predators: wolves, bears, mountain lions, animals most people spend their lives avoiding. My job was to get up close with them at their most vulnerable and most dangerous moments. Little did I know that experience would be what kept me alive when the world froze over. At the Wildlife Center, my days followed a predictable pattern: morning rounds checking on recovering patients, surgeries scheduled for midday when the animals were least active, and evenings documenting cases and preparing treatment plans. I lived for the challenge of working with apex predators, understanding their behaviors, anticipating their reactions, and knowing when to push and when to back away. These weren't pets. They were wild forces of nature that demanded respect. I'd been at Yellowstone for 6 years when things began to change. It started with the wolves. Our resident pack suddenly refused food despite being perfectly healthy. 4 days of complete rejection of meals. I checked them for illness, ran blood work, examined them thoroughly. Nothing was medically wrong. They just wouldn't eat. Then the bears started acting strange. By late September 2027, our 3 rehabilitation bears should have been showing pre-hibernation behaviors: increased appetite, nest building, decreased activity. Instead, they remained fully alert, restless, pacing their enclosures day and night. Their biological clocks had somehow been disrupted. But the most disturbing sign came in early October when the birds vanished. One morning I arrived at work and noticed the silence immediately. No songbirds, no ravens, no hawks circling above. They had all simply disappeared overnight, as if they'd received some silent evacuation order the rest of us couldn't hear. Something's wrong with the animals, I told Dr. Alvarez, our senior researcher, as we stood watching a normally docile elk ram repeatedly charging the fence of its enclosure. I've never seen behavior like this across so many species simultaneously. She nodded, checking readings on her tablet. The barometric pressure has been fluctuating wildly for 2 weeks. Maybe they're sensing something in the atmosphere our instruments aren't calibrated to detect. I remember laughing at that. What, like they know the weather's going to change? It's always cold in Wyoming by October. Not like this, she said, showing me long-term forecast models. These patterns don't match anything in our historical data. I dismissed it. We all did. Even when my sister called from Denver talking about an unusual cold front moving down from Canada, I told her it was just an early winter. Put on an extra sweater and stop watching those doomsday weather channels, I joked. The Wildlife Center hosted a climate science conference that week. I sat in on several sessions, listening to experts debate atmospheric anomalies being recorded across the Northern Hemisphere. Most concluded it was concerning but not catastrophic, just another data point in the ongoing climate crisis. One scientist suggested it might be the beginning of a minor cooling period. They argued about methodologies and measurement techniques, but nobody predicted what was actually coming. I remember writing in my journal that night: animals distressed, scientists unconcerned. Who should I believe? In hindsight, I should have trusted the wolves. The day before everything changed was remarkably ordinary. I performed surgery on a young cougar with a broken leg, filed reports, called my parents in Michigan about coming to visit for Thanksgiving. Our supply truck made its weekly delivery: extra feed, medications, cleaning supplies. I signed for the shipment without realizing those routine supplies would later determine who lived and who died. That evening, a few of us gathered in the staff lounge watching reports about unusual weather patterns developing across Canada. The meteorologist pointed to swirling blue masses on the map, but assured viewers this was just a stronger-than-average polar vortex event. We changed the channel to a basketball game. I went to bed in my on-site cabin that night completely unaware. If I had known it was the last normal night on Earth, I might have done things differently, called more people, gathered more supplies, prepared for what was coming. Instead, I set my alarm for 6 in the morning and fell asleep to the sound of wolves howling continuously in the distance. I woke to the emergency alert system blaring from my phone. The harsh electronic tone jolted me upright at 5:15 in the morning. The message was simple but chilling. Extreme weather event imminent. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a test. I rushed to the window and saw it on the horizon. A wall of white, unlike any storm front I'd ever witnessed. It wasn't just snow clouds. It was something more ominous, as if the sky itself was collapsing toward us. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my emergency kit, and ran for the main facility. Dr. Alvarez was already on the observation deck, staring through binoculars at the approaching phenomenon. "The temperature's dropping 6 degrees every hour," she said without lowering the binoculars. "This isn't possible." The wind hit first, not the typical Wyoming gusts we were used to, but something that sounded alive, howling and screaming as it tore across the valley. The temperature plummeted so quickly that windows began to crack from thermal stress. Within 3 hours, we watched the digital thermometer drop from 28 degrees to -15. "We need to secure the animals and get everyone inside the main building," I said, taking charge as our facility director was unreachable in Bozeman. "The cabins won't hold heat against this." We worked frantically to bring vulnerable animals into interior enclosures, prioritizing those least adapted to extreme cold. Many staff initially worried more about the animals than themselves, not yet grasping what was happening. I had to physically pull our bird specialist away from the raptor enclosure when the first truly dangerous winds hit. "The animals or us," I shouted over the wind. "We can't save both right now." By noon, all 27 staff members who had been on site were gathered in the main building. Veterinarians, researchers, animal care specialists, maintenance workers, administrative staff. Some were still in pajamas, having rushed from their cabins with whatever they could carry. The power flickered but held as the backup generators kicked in. We gathered around the emergency radio, listening to increasingly frantic reports. This wasn't just hitting Wyoming. The entire northern hemisphere was experiencing a catastrophic temperature drop. Cities were losing power as electrical grids failed. Roads were impassable. The president declared a national emergency and ordered everyone to remain sheltered in place. "How long can this last?" someone asked. No one had an answer. The weather models had all failed. This was beyond anything meteorologists had predicted or prepared for. As night fell, the temperature outside dropped to -40. The storm raged with intensifying fury, snow accumulating at rates of nearly a foot per hour. The wind chill factor was incalculable. We set up sleeping areas in the interior rooms, rationed out the food from our cafeteria, and tried to contact emergency services. All circuits were busy. Morgan, our IT specialist, volunteered to check the satellite dish on the roof to establish a more stable connection. "I'll be quick," he said, bundling up in our best cold weather gear. 10 minutes tops. When he didn't return after 20 minutes, 4 of us went searching. We found him on the roof, frozen in position, reaching for the satellite array. His body was already solid, his eyes open and frosted over, his last breath crystallized in front of his face. The cold had killed him so quickly he hadn't even had time to radio for help. That was when the reality of our situation truly hit me. This wasn't just a storm. This was extinction. We brought Morgan's body inside, unable to properly bury him with the ground already frozen solid. That first death changed everything. Suddenly, people looked to me for answers. Not because I was in charge, but because I was the one who worked with predators. I understood survival when the odds were stacked against you. "We need to inventory everything," I told them, pushing aside my own shock and grief. "Food, water, medicine, fuel for the generators. Every calorie, every ounce, every watt of power matters now." We discovered we had enough food for about 2 weeks if strictly rationed. The generators had fuel for 10 days at most. Water wouldn't be a problem with all the snow, if we could melt it. Medical supplies were limited mainly to veterinary use, but many could be adapted for humans. That first night, 3 people developed hypothermia despite being indoors. Our building, designed for Wyoming winters, wasn't built for temperatures this extreme. I used my knowledge of treating cold-stressed wildlife to help them. Core rewarming techniques, careful monitoring of heart rate, preventing the deadly afterdrop, phenomenon that kills many hypothermia victims during recovery. By morning, the world outside was unrecognizable. Snow had covered everything to the second-story windows. The temperature had stabilized at around -50. The radio brought only static, occasionally punctuated by fragments of emergency broadcasts. We were entirely on our own. I established a leadership structure based on what I knew about wolf packs. Clear hierarchy, defined responsibilities, communal care for the vulnerable. Some disagreed with taking guidance from a veterinarian, but most recognized the survival value in organization. We assigned teams for resource management, security, medical care, and maintenance. Every decision was made with one question in mind: will this keep us alive another day? The first week passed in a blur of crisis management. 2 more staff members developed severe cold injuries after attempting to reach the storage building for additional supplies. I had to make the difficult decision to humanely help several critically ill animals rest to conserve resources and prevent distress. Each night, the temperature seemed to drop further, and each morning we awakened to new challenges. On the 7th night, Dr. Alvarez called me to the observation deck. The storm had briefly cleared, revealing a sky unlike anything I'd ever seen. Brilliant ribbons of green and purple light danced above the snow-covered landscape, the northern lights visible this far south for the first time in recorded history. "The magnetic field is being disrupted," she whispered, her breath clouding between us. "Kestrel, this isn't just weather. Something fundamental is changing with the planet." The next morning, we made the fateful decision to send 5 of our strongest staff members to reach the ranger station 5 miles away. They took our best cold weather gear, emergency supplies, and our hopes for contact with the outside world. We watched them disappear into the white landscape, following the barely visible line of the access road. None of them made it back. 3 days after our 5 colleagues left for the ranger station, we organized a search party. The storm had temporarily subsided, creating a deceptive illusion of calm. The landscape was alien, smooth white drifts punctuated by the skeletal shapes of trees, their branches heavy with ice. The sunlight reflecting off the snow was blinding, forcing us to use improvised snow goggles I fashioned from medical tape and sunglasses. We found 3 of our friends along what used to be the access road. They were completely still, their positions telling a somber story of their final moments. Javier had apparently fallen first, and the others had tried to carry him before succumbing themselves. They hadn't even made it halfway to the ranger station. The other 2 were never found, presumably buried beneath the constantly shifting snowdrifts. The most concerning discovery wasn't our friends themselves, but what one of them clutched. A journal with entries describing what they'd seen before: stopping, massive ice formations unlike anything in recorded geology, wildlife frozen in place mid-motion, and most troubling, the remains of vehicles abandoned on the main highway, some still containing people. "There's no help coming," I told the others after we returned. "We are completely on our own." That night, our primary generator failed. The extreme cold had thickened the fuel to sludge, making it unusable. Our maintenance specialist, Rodriguez, worked through the night to get the backup running, but we all understood the implications. Every system had a breaking point in these temperatures, including us. By day 10, maintaining body heat became our primary concern. We consolidated everyone into the interior conference room, using body heat to maintain a survivable temperature. Even indoors, anyone who ventured into the outer rooms risked cold injuries within minutes. We melted snow for water using the last functioning stove, watching our fuel supplies dwindle with each passing day. Food rationing began in earnest. 600 calories per person per day, barely enough to sustain life, especially considering the additional calorie burn our bodies required to generate heat. The center's cafeteria had never been stocked for a long-term emergency. As the wildlife veterinarian, I found myself calculating human nutritional needs the same way I once did for recovering predators. The body prioritizes, I explained during one tense meal distribution. First, the extremities receive less circulation as the body redirects blood flow to protect the core organs. Then non-essential functions begin to slow down. The goal is to stay just above that threshold. Most listened intently. A few looked away, unable to confront our new reality. One man, Carson from accounting, kept his rations, eating them all, at once and then asking for more later. I recognized the behavior pattern. In wolves, it would indicate an animal that might challenge the pack order. I watched him carefully after that. On day 12, we lost heat in the eastern section of the building as pipes burst and flooded before freezing solid. The temperature indoors dropped to just above freezing in our refuge room. Hypothermia cases increased, particularly among those with less body fat. I used every trick I knew from treating cold-stressed wildlife: layering, careful rewarming, preventing moisture accumulation in clothing. Still, we lost our oldest member, Dr. Willis, during the night. His heart simply stopped as his body temperature slowly dropped. I performed my first human autopsy that day, applying what I knew from animal medicine to confirm the cause of death. The others watched in horrified fascination as I clinically explained the physiological processes of hypothermia. Some were disturbed by my detachment, but I recognized it as the same professional distance I maintained when treating critical animal patients. Emotion only clouds judgment when survival hangs in the balance. By day 15, the food situation became critical. Our calculations showed supplies would be exhausted within 3 days. 20 people remaining, each needing minimum calories to prevent organ failure. The math was brutally simple and utterly devastating. We held a council to discuss options. Some suggested attempting to reach town despite knowing what happened to our previous expedition. Others proposed more extreme measures. As the debate grew heated, I found myself speaking with the calm authority I used when directing emergency surgeries. There are animals in the rehabilitation enclosures, I said, silencing the room. Protein sources we've been ignoring because of sentiment. The silence that followed was profound. These were animals we had cared for, named, treated. The idea of harvesting them as food was abhorrent to everyone present, yet the alternative was starvation. The wolf pack would do it without hesitation, I continued. Survival doesn't have room for sentiment. Dr. Alvarez was the first to support me. The ethical choice isn't between killing animals and not killing them. It's between controlled euthanasia for survival and watching each other starve to death. The decision was made, though not unanimously. I selected the animals least likely to survive the ongoing catastrophe regardless, those with chronic conditions or injuries that would prevent hunting in the wild. I performed the euthanasia myself, using the same humane methods I'd always employed, then demonstrated proper field dressing techniques I'd learned during wildlife management courses. That night we ate. No one spoke of what we were consuming. No one needed to. The next morning we picked up the first clear radio transmission since the disaster began, a military frequency broadcasting evacuation instructions for regions south of the 40th parallel. The voice described massive population movements toward the equator, conflicts over resources, temporary settlements established in southern states. It mentioned global cooling event and atmospheric collapse before cutting out entirely. They've abandoned the northern states, Rodriguez said, still adjusting the radio dial searching for more information. They're writing us off. I wasn't surprised. In nature, adaptation means sacrificing what cannot be saved to preserve the whole. Triage is not cruelty, it's necessity. On day 18, we detected movement outside the facility for the first time since the disaster. Our security cameras, still functioning on backup power, showed figures moving through the snow. 3 people following the same path our failed expedition had taken, but in reverse. They were heading toward us. The debate was immediate and intense. Some wanted to welcome these survivors, share our remaining resources. Others argued we barely had enough to sustain ourselves. I remained silent, observing the group dynamics until Carson spoke up. "We should take their supplies and send them away," he said. Several people gasped, but others nodded in agreement. "We're not animals," Dr. Alvarez countered. "Exactly," I finally said. "Animals would have a clearer protocol for this situation. Wolves defend territory when resources are scarce but can accept new pack members when they bring value." We positioned observers at windows and prepared for contact. When the strangers reached our door, we allowed them inside but maintained a security perimeter. They were park rangers who had survived at their station but ran out of fuel. They brought little except information, and that information was grim. The rangers confirmed what we had feared. This wasn't a temporary weather event but a catastrophic climate shift. Government communications they'd received before losing contact suggested that a combination of factors, atmospheric composition changes, ocean current disruptions, and solar activity, had triggered a rapid onset ice age. Predictions varied, but none suggested a return to previous conditions within our lifetimes. The last transmissions, we got said scientific consensus puts this at a minimum 50-year event, the senior ranger explained, his frostbitten face showing little emotion. "They're evacuating everyone they can below the freeze line, but that's moving south every day." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the wildlife still in our care and those in the park beyond. How many would survive? Which species would adapt? Nature had endured ice ages before, but never one that arrived with such brutal speed. Even the most resilient species needed time to adjust their behaviors, their migrations, their physiologies. On day 20, we witnessed our first human conflict. Carson was caught stealing extra rations, creating a hidden stockpile in an unused office. When confronted, he became aggressive, threatening anyone who came near. I recognized the desperation in his eyes, the same look I'd seen in cornered predators. "Back away slowly," I instructed the others. "No sudden movements." He brandished a broken chair leg as a weapon. "You don't control me," he snarled. "I'm not one of your animals." "But you are," I replied calmly. "We all are. Mammals fighting for survival in harsh conditions. The difference is whether we do it alone or as a pack." While maintaining eye contact with him, I slowly reached into my medical bag and prepared a syringe with ketamine, the same tranquilizer I used for aggressive wolves. When he lunged at Rodriguez, I moved with the practiced precision of someone used to darting unpredictable wildlife. The injection took effect within minutes. We secured him in a separate room until the drug wore off. After that incident, I instituted behavioral protocols based on predator management techniques. Clear boundaries, consistent consequences, transparency, about resources, regular security checks. Some thought it was excessive, others recognized it as necessary adaptation to our new reality. On day 23, we detected another group approaching the center, larger, more organized, moving with purpose rather than desperation. Through binoculars, I counted 12 people with sleds and what appeared to be weapons. They established a camp within view of our facility but made no immediate move toward us. For 2 days, we watched each other. They were clearly assessing our defenses, our numbers, our resources. I recognized the behavior from studying wolf packs establishing territory boundaries. They were sizing us up, determining if we were worth the risk of confrontation. On the morning of day 25, we observed their camp being approached by another group, 3 people stumbling through the snow without proper equipment. Even from a distance, the encounter's nature was clear. The newcomers were robbed of their supplies and left in the snow. No shots were fired. None were needed in these conditions. Abandonment was a death sentence. "That could have been us," whispered one of our younger staff members. "It still could be," I replied. "We need to prepare." We established a 24-hour watch rotation and brought all essential supplies to our core shelter area. I distributed veterinary tools that could serve as weapons if needed: scalpels, bone saws, heavy sedatives. The rangers contributed their knowledge of defensible positions and sight lines. That afternoon, the temperature plummeted again as another storm system moved in. The outside thermometer registered -80 before ceasing function altogether. Inside, our core, temperature dropped below freezing despite all efforts. The building structure began to fail as materials contracted beyond their tolerances, creating ominous cracking sounds throughout the facility. During the night, the hostile group outside broke camp and moved away, driven by the same brutal cold that threatened us. We survived not through superior defense, but because the environment was an equalizer. Nature cared nothing for human conflicts. It simply eliminated those who failed to adapt. By morning, 2 more of our group showed signs of severe hypothermia. Dr. Alvarez worked alongside me, applying the techniques I'd taught for core rewarming. Her hands moved with precision despite the cold, her focus absolute. Of all the humans remaining, she was the one I'd come to trust most, the one whose instincts seemed most aligned with survival. "The building won't last another week," she told me privately as we monitored our patients. "The structural integrity is compromised." I nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. We need to find a new shelter, or create one better suited to these conditions. "Like what?" she asked. "Where can we go that's any better than here?" I thought of the wolves, of how they would handle this situation. They wouldn't fight the environment, they would work with it, find natural shelters, utilize terrain advantages, move when necessary, stay when beneficial. "I need to check something," I told her, preparing to venture into the outer sections of the building that we'd abandoned to the cold. Along the east corridor, near the wolf rehabilitation area, I made my way to the observation room overlooking the outdoor enclosures. Through the frosted window I could just make out movement in the swirling snow. Our wolf pack, the one that had stopped eating days before the disaster, was still alive. Not only alive, but active. They had created a den entrance in a snowbank against the south-facing rock wall where the sun's minimal heat created a slightly warmer microclimate. They emerged periodically, moved with purpose, returned to shelter. They were surviving while we were slowly dying. "They know something we don't," I whispered, my breath freezing instantly on the glass. As I turned to head back to our shelter area, a structural beam gave way above me with a sound like a gunshot. I dove forward as a section of ceiling collapsed, barely escaping being crushed. The path back to the others was now blocked by debris and exposed to the outside temperature. I was cut off, alone in a rapidly failing section of the building, with the temperature dropping by the minute. My training kicked in. Don't panic. Assess. Adapt. I had perhaps 20 minutes before hypothermia would begin affecting my judgment. I needed shelter immediately. Looking back toward the wolf enclosure, I made a decision that would change everything. I made my way to the emergency exit that led directly to the wolf enclosure, grabbing a tranquilizer gun from the nearby storage cabinet. My fingers were already growing numb as I fumbled with the keys. The moment I opened the door, the full force of the cold hit me like a physical blow. -80 degrees isn't just cold, it's an active threat that attacks exposed skin within seconds. The wolves noticed me immediately. 6 pairs of eyes tracked my movement as I entered their territory. The alpha, a large gray male we called Timber, stood at the entrance of their snow den, his posture alert but not immediately aggressive. I had treated him 3 months earlier for a leg injury. Animals remember those who cause them pain, but they also remember those who relieve it. I approached slowly, tranquilizer ready but hoping I wouldn't need it. My breath froze instantly in the air, creating a cloud of ice crystals that sparkled in the dim light. Every instinct I had developed working with predators told me to maintain eye contact but not to stare, to move confidently but not aggressively, to signal I was neither threat nor prey. 20 feet from their den I stopped. Timber watched me, his intelligent eyes assessing. I could feel frostbite setting in on my exposed face, the clock ticking down on my survival. The alpha made his decision, moving away from the den entrance, not fleeing but creating space, an invitation or at least not a rejection. I moved forward, fighting the violent shivering that threatened to overtake my body. The snow den entrance was small, requiring me to crawl. I knew the risk I was taking, cornering myself in a confined space with wild predators. But the alternative was freezing to death within minutes. Inside, the temperature was remarkably warmer perhaps 20 degrees instead of -80. The wolves had created an igloo-like structure against the rock face where geothermal warming from the park's underground activity created a microclimate. The space was about 12 feet in diameter, with the pack arranged in a circle, their bodies conserving heat. They watched as I positioned myself against the far wall, careful not to disrupt their arrangement. I spoke softly, continuously, the way I always did during examinations and treatments. The words didn't matter. It was the tone, the consistency, the lack of fear or aggression in my voice that communicated my intentions. For hours we existed in a tense standoff, neither fully accepting nor rejecting each other's presence. When a younger wolf approached me curiously, Timber gave a low growl establishing the boundary. I remained still, letting them set the terms of this unusual arrangement. My veterinary training told me to respect their pack dynamics. My survival instinct told me this might be my only chance. As night fell, the temperature dropped further. The wolves moved closer together and I curled into myself, trying to maintain core temperature. Sometime during the night I felt a warm body press against my back. One of the wolves, not Timber but an older female we called Ash, had positioned herself next to me. Not out of affection, but practical thermodynamics. A warm body was a warm body, regardless of species. By morning, a pattern had been established. The wolves tolerated my presence as long as I respected their hierarchy and contributed to the group's warmth. They left periodically to hunt, returning with small rodents they'd somehow managed to find beneath the snow. They didn't share their food, but they didn't chase me from the shelter either. I needed to get back to the others to show them what I'd learned, but the storm continued unabated for 2 more days. On the 3rd morning, when conditions improved slightly, I prepared to leave. Timber watched me intently as I crawled toward the exit. He made no move to stop me, but his eyes held what I could only interpret as a question. Why would any creature leave this shelter for the killing cold outside? The journey back to the main building was arduous. The snow had drifted to incredible heights, creating an entirely new landscape. What had been a straightforward path was now a treacherous obstacle course. Twice I fell through snow bridges into pockets of air, barely managing to claw my way back to the surface. When I finally reached the main entrance, I found it partially collapsed. I called out, my voice weak from cold and exertion. After several minutes, I heard movement inside. The door cracked open to reveal Dr. Alvarez, her face gaunt with hunger and worry. "Kestrel," she whispered, "we thought you were dead." Inside, conditions had deteriorated dramatically. The ceiling in 2 more sections had collapsed. The temperature in their shelter area hovered just above 0. Of the 20 people who had been there when I left, I counted only 16. Their faces told the story of the ones missing. "I found something," I told them, my voice urgent despite my exhaustion. "The wolves have created a shelter system using the geothermal warmth from the rock face. The temperature inside is survivable without additional heat sources." Some looked interested, others skeptical. Carson, who had been reintegrated into the group under close supervision, openly scoffed. "You want us to live with wolves like animals?" "We are animals," I replied, too tired to soften the truth. "And right now they're surviving better than we are." Dr. Alvarez examined the frostbite on my face, applying the limited medical supplies we had left. "Tell me exactly what you observed," she said, her scientific mind engaging with the possibility, despite her obvious skepticism. I described the den construction, the positioning to maximize geothermal heat, the behavioral adaptations I'd witnessed. As I spoke, I noticed others listening more intently. Hope is a powerful motivator, especially when all other options have been exhausted. "Even if this works," Rodriguez pointed out, "how do we transition 20 people into a space with predators without triggering an attack response?" It was a valid question, one I'd been considering during my journey back. "Gradually," I explained. "Small groups. I'll go first with those the wolves have already met. We establish position, then slowly introduce others." The debate continued, for hours. Our food was nearly gone. The building continued to creak and groan as the structure failed. Outside, the temperature remained lethal. In the end, we didn't so much reach consensus as confront the absence of alternatives. We divided into groups of 4. I would lead the first group to establish a base camp near the wolf den. If successful, the others would follow in 12-hour intervals, giving the pack time to adjust to each new human presence. We gathered what little remained of our supplies, medical kits, the last of the food, essential tools, and clothing. As we prepared to leave, Carson pulled me aside. "I'm coming with the first group," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I studied him, reading his body language the way I would an unpredictable animal. His eyes darted to our supplies, his posture tense with barely contained energy. I recognized the signs. He was planning something, likely to take control of the resources once we were isolated from the others. "No," I told him firmly. "You'll be in the third group." His face hardened, hand moving subtly toward his pocket where I suspected he'd hidden one of the kitchen knives. "You don't give the orders here, Wolfman. I'm coming with the first group." Before he could react, I drove my fist into his solar plexus, a technique I'd learned for temporarily disabling large predators during examinations. As he doubled over, gasping for breath, I spoke to him the way I would a challenging animal, my voice calm but authoritative. "You're displaying aggression to the wrong pack member," I said quietly. "I've spent my career handling creatures far more dangerous than you." The others watched in silence as Rodriguez and one of the rangers secured him. No one protested. The pack dynamics had been established, and my position was clear. Our first group departed an hour later, myself, Dr. Alvarez, Rodriguez, and one of the rangers. The journey to the wolf enclosure was even more difficult with equipment, but the knowledge of a destination with relative warmth drove us forward. When we arrived, I approached the den entrance alone, using the same careful technique as before. Timber was waiting, as if he'd expected my return. He watched, impassively as I crawled inside, then tensed visibly when he detected the scent of the others waiting outside. I spoke continuously in that same calm, measured tone, explaining what we needed, though I knew he couldn't understand the words. It was the intention, the energy, the lack of threat in my presence that mattered. After almost an hour, Dr. Alvarez joined me, moving with the slow deliberation I'd instructed. The wolves shifted, creating a larger perimeter around us, but didn't retreat from the den entirely. Progress. Rodriguez came next, then finally the ranger. By nightfall, we had established a human section of the den, separated from the wolves by an unspoken boundary. The temperature inside remained remarkably stable, cold enough to see our breath, but warm enough to survive without the constant threat of hypothermia. The wolves continued their hunting patterns, increasingly tolerant of our presence as long as we respected their space. The second group arrived the following day. The introduction process was repeated, with each new human entering individually under my supervision. The pack grew more restless with each addition, but adjusted as I'd hoped they would. By the end of the third day, 12 humans shared the expanded den with 6 wolves, an uneasy alliance forged by mutual need for warmth. When the final group was scheduled to arrive, Carson was conspicuously absent. The others reported he had broken into our medical supplies during the night and taken a significant portion of our remaining food before disappearing into the storm. "He won't survive out there alone," Dr. Alvarez said. "Some animals choose isolation over adaptation," I replied. "Nature will decide his fate." As our unusual cohabitation continued, we began to observe and learn from the wolves' survival techniques. They conserved energy during the coldest periods, moving only when necessary. They hunted cooperatively, sharing information about food sources through subtle behaviors. They maintained the den meticulously, preventing snow buildup that would compromise their shelter. We adapted these techniques to our human needs. Conservation of calories became our highest priority. We established hunting parties that mimicked the wolves' patterns, learning to detect the subtle movements of small mammals beneath the snow. We expanded the den system, creating additional chambers that utilized the geothermal warming. 2 weeks after establishing our new shelter, We detected movement outside during a brief clear period. Through binoculars, we observed 3 figures approaching, not from the direction of the main building, but from the forest to the west. They moved, with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to survive in the extreme cold. I recognized their technique immediately. They were using the same movement patterns as the wolves, minimizing exposure, utilizing natural windbreaks, conserving energy. These weren't desperate survivors. They were adapted predators. When they came within hailing distance, I went out to meet them, accompanied by 2 others from our group. To my shock, their leader was an elderly Native American man who moved through the deep snow with surprising agility. "We saw your smoke," he said without preamble. "Not many fires still burning in this cold." We had indeed started using small, carefully controlled fires near vent holes we'd created in the den roof, another adaptation we'd developed to supplement the geothermal heating. "We have shelter," I told him. "Limited resources, but we're surviving." He nodded, studying me with intense, knowing eyes. "You're living with the wolves. We've been watching." I didn't ask how they knew. The old man gestured toward the west, where the mountains rose against the white horizon. "We have a settlement, 26 people in caves warmed by the earth's heat, same as your wolves found." He paused, looking at our makeshift den. "Your way is good, but there are better shelters, deeper warmth. We've been walking this land for 2 weeks, looking for others who learn to adapt rather than fight the cold." Hope surged through me, not just for immediate survival, but for something more sustainable. "Why would you share this with strangers?" I asked, the caution I'd developed since the disaster making me wary of unexpected generosity. The old man smiled slightly. "The strong alone will die. The strong together might survive." He pointed to the wolf den. "They know this. Now you do too." After careful consideration and scouting to verify their claims, we prepared to relocate to these caves. The journey would be dangerous, 5 miles through lethal cold. But the promise of a more secure shelter with established resources justified the risk. The most surprising development came the morning of our departure. As we gathered outside the den, the wolf pack emerged as well. Timber stood watching our preparations, then began moving in the same direction our new allies had indicated. The other wolves followed. "Are they leaving because of us?" Dr. Alvarez asked. "No," I said, understanding dawning. "They're showing us the way." As we set out across the frozen landscape, the wolves maintained a distance of about 50 yards ahead, their path creating a navigable trail through the deepest snowdrifts. Whether by coincidence or design, they were leading us toward the caves our new allies had described. The realization hit me with profound force. We hadn't just borrowed the wolves' den or mimicked their techniques. We had been accepted, however peripherally, into an ancient system of survival that transcended species boundaries. In the face of catastrophic climate change, the old divisions between human and animal, predator and prey, were being rewritten by the brutal mathematics of survival. 4 hours into our journey, we crested a ridge and saw it, a series of cave openings in the mountainside, small columns of steam rising from ventilation holes, similar to what we'd created in our snow den. Even from a distance, I could see people moving around the entrances, gathering wood, maintaining pathways through the snow. The wolves stopped at the edge of the tree line, watching as we continued forward. Timber's eyes met mine one final time, not with affection or connection, but with something more profound: recognition. We were different predators facing the same extinction threat. Our species had diverged millions of years ago, but in this frozen world our paths had converged once more. As we approached the cave settlement, I looked back at the wolves disappearing into the forest. They had taught me the most important lesson of this new ice age: that survival wasn't about dominating nature or fighting against it. It was about becoming part of it, once again. The last I saw of Timber was his tail disappearing into the whiteness, his pack following close behind. Not fleeing from us, but moving parallel to our journey. Different paths, same direction. Different methods, same goal: survival. The cave system was more extensive than I had imagined, a network of interconnected chambers that extended deep into the mountainside. The temperature increased noticeably as we ventured further in, climbing from just above freezing near the entrance to almost 50 degrees in the deepest accessible chambers. After weeks of bitter cold, it felt almost tropical. Our new allies, led by the elderly man who introduced himself as Joseph, had established an impressively organized settlement. 26 people from various backgrounds, park employees, local residents, and members of Joseph's extended family from the nearby reservation, had created a functioning community in the midst of catastrophe. The ancestors knew about these caves, Joseph explained as he showed us through the network. They used them during the harshest winters long before written records. The Earth's warmth rises through cracks in the rock. The deeper you go, the warmer it gets. He wasn't exaggerating. In the lowest chamber, steam rose from a small pool of water heated by geothermal activity deep beneath the mountain. The settlers had arranged sleeping areas in concentric circles around these heat sources, with communal spaces and food preparation areas situated to maximize the natural warmth. What impressed me most was their systematic approach to survival. They had established clear roles based on skills and experience: hunters, healers, scouts, builders. Each person contributed according to their abilities. Resources were cataloged and distributed according to need. Conflicts were addressed through a council of elders who made decisions for the group's collective benefit. It reminded me of the wolf pack dynamics I'd studied throughout my career: pragmatic, hierarchical, focused on group survival rather than individual comfort. The parallels were striking, though I kept these observations to myself at first. Not everyone was ready to acknowledge how quickly we'd reverted to animal behaviors when pushed to the edge of extinction. Dr. Alvarez noticed it too. "They've adapted faster than we did," she whispered as we were shown the food storage area. "They skipped the denial stage entirely." She was right. While we had spent precious days hoping for rescue, these people had immediately accepted their new reality and adjusted accordingly. It made me wonder what other instinctive wisdom we'd forgotten in our centuries of climate-controlled comfort. Our group was integrated into their system after a careful evaluation of our skills. My veterinary expertise was immediately valuable, as they had domesticated animals: several dogs, a few cats, and remarkably a small herd of goats they had rescued from a nearby farm. These animals were not pets but essential resources. The dogs assisted with hunting, the cats controlled rodent populations in the food storage areas, and the goats provided milk and would eventually provide meat. I was paired with their healer, a middle-aged woman named Clara who had been a nurse at the Yellowstone Medical Center. Together, we established a more comprehensive medical protocol for the settlement, combining my knowledge of animal medicine with her human healthcare experience. Some of my veterinary techniques proved surprisingly applicable to human patients in our resource-limited environment. "The principles are the same," I explained when teaching her how to set a broken bone using materials at hand: stabilize the fracture, ensure blood flow, prevent infection. The anatomy differs, but the biology doesn't. In return, she taught me techniques specific to human physiology that I adapted into my treatment protocols. Our collaborative approach improved survival outcomes for both humans and animals in the settlement. The days fell into a rhythm: wake at dawn, assess medical needs, join hunting parties when required, treat injuries and illnesses, sleep when exhaustion demanded it. The bitter cold outside remained a constant threat, but within the caves we created a semblance of stability. During my third week at the settlement, Joseph invited me to join a scouting expedition. 3 of us would venture north to assess conditions and look for additional survivors or resources. It was dangerous but necessary work. Our population was growing as scattered survivors occasionally found their way to our refuge, and with them came increased resource demands. We set out before dawn, equipped with the specialized cold weather gear the settlement had developed: layers of animal hides and salvaged synthetic materials, face protection fashioned from goggles and balaclavas, improvised crampons for navigating ice. The temperature outside remained near -60, but we had learned to move efficiently, minimizing exposure and conserving energy. The landscape had transformed beyond recognition. Where forests had stood, only the upper portions of trees remained visible above the snow. Valleys had filled completely, creating vast white plains broken only by the tops of buried structures. Navigation relied on memorized landmark points, a mountain peak here, a distinctive rock formation there. Everything else had vanished beneath the white. We traveled 8 miles north, moving in the same energy-efficient pattern I had observed. In the wolves, periods of steady movement followed by brief rests in whatever shelter we could find. Along the way, we discovered signs of other survivors, tracks in the snow, smoke from hidden encampments, once even distant figures on a ridge who disappeared before we could approach. Near what had once been the main highway, we found a recently abandoned camp. The remnants told a story of hasty departure, food left mid-preparation, sleeping areas still arranged. Whatever had driven these people away had come suddenly. "Predators," said Miguel, one of the scouts accompanying me, pointing to distinctive tracks in the snow around the perimeter. I examined them carefully. "Not wolves," I concluded. "Human. See the boot patterns? The straight line approach? Wolves circle their prey. Humans attack directly." Joseph nodded grimly. "Raiders. They're becoming more common. Groups who take rather than build." We proceeded with greater caution after that discovery. The extreme environment hadn't just changed our relationship with nature. It had altered the social contract between humans as well. Some had embraced cooperation as the path to survival. Others had chosen predation. Both were natural responses, seen throughout the animal kingdom during resource scarcity. On our return journey, we diverted to investigate a plume of steam rising from what appeared to be a flat expanse of snow. As we approached, I recognized the area as one of Yellowstone's geyser basins. The geothermal features had created a microclimate where the snow had partially melted, revealing patches of bare ground. More significantly, we found evidence of life flourishing in this thermal oasis. Small mammals had congregated near the warmth, birds we hadn't seen since before the freeze circled overhead. Most surprisingly, we discovered new plant growth in the areas closest to the geothermal vents, tiny green shoots pushing through the otherwise frozen soil. "Life finds a way," Joseph said, echoing my thoughts. "The Earth is not dead. It's merely sleeping." This discovery held profound implications for our long-term survival. If geothermal areas could sustain plant life despite the extreme conditions, they could potentially serve as agricultural zones. I collected samples of the plants and soil to bring back for further study. As we prepared to leave the geyser basin, movement on the ridge above caught my attention. I raised my hand, signaling the others to freeze. Through the swirling steam, I could make out the distinctive silhouette of a wolf, large, alert, watching us intently. "Timber?" I whispered, recognizing something in the animal's posture. The wolf made no aggressive move, merely observed us with that peculiar intelligence I had come to respect. After several minutes, it turned and loped away, disappearing over the ridge. Whether it was actually timber or another wolf, the encounter reinforced my growing belief that the traditional boundaries between species were shifting in this new world. We returned to the settlement with our findings, the abandoned camp, the raider tracks, and, most importantly, the geothermal oasis with its promising signs of life. The Council of Elders listened attentively to our report, particularly interested in the potential for cultivating plants in the geyser basin. "If we could establish a growing area there," Dr. Alvarez mused, "even a small plot could supplement our protein sources with essential nutrients." Plans were made for a larger expedition to the thermal area, with the goal of testing its viability for controlled food production. In the meantime, I continued my work with the settlement's animals, particularly focused on helping the goats adapt to their cave environment. It was during this period that we experienced our first significant loss. A hunting party of 4 failed to return after 3 days. A search team found 3 bodies at the base of a cliff. An apparent accident, caused by disorientation in a sudden storm. The 4th hunter was never found. The settlement mourned collectively, holding a ceremony that blended elements from various cultural traditions represented in our diverse group. I observed how the shared grief strengthened rather than weakened our community bonds. Like a wolf pack that grows more cohesive after losing a member, we adjusted our hunting rotations, redistributed responsibilities, and moved forward. As winter deepened, we received reports from occasional new arrivals that painted a grim picture of the world beyond our caves. Major cities had fallen into chaos as power grids failed completely. Government evacuation efforts had focused on southern regions, abandoning the northern states as uninhabitable. Conflicts over resources had escalated from isolated incidents to organized warfare in some areas. Yet within our settlement, we had established a functional society. Our population had grown to 53 people as we absorbed scattered survivors. Our food storage systems, hunting techniques, and medical protocols had evolved to meet changing needs. We had even begun the early stages of cultivating cold-resistant fungi in some of the warmer cave chambers, the first steps toward a more sustainable food source. I found myself increasingly respected within the community, not just for my medical knowledge but for the survival philosophy I had developed through my work with predators. People sought my advice on matters beyond healthcare, conflict resolution, resource allocation, security concerns. My understanding of territorial behavior and hierarchical structures proved surprisingly applicable to our emerging social order. During my 7th week at the settlement, our scouts reported a large group approaching from the south, approximately 20 people traveling with sleds and what appeared to be significant supplies. After careful observation, determined they weren't raiders. We made contact. They were a research team from the University of Montana who had been on an expedition when the freeze began. Led by a climatologist named Dr. Harrison, they had managed to salvage crucial equipment from their research station before it was abandoned. We've been monitoring atmospheric conditions across the northern hemisphere, Dr. Harrison explained when brought before our council. The data suggests this isn't temporary. Global temperatures have fallen an average of 45 degrees in less than 3 months. The scientific confirmation of what we already suspected wasn't surprising, but his next statement was, "The pattern matches historical Ice Age onset signatures, but at an unprecedented acceleration rate. Based on ice core samples and geological records, similar climate shifts historically took centuries or millennia. This happened in weeks." "So what triggered it?" Dr. Alvarez asked. Dr. Harrison's team had theories, but no definitive answer. A combination of factors, changing ocean currents, atmospheric composition shifts, solar activity variations, had created a perfect storm of cooling conditions. Once the process began, feedback loops accelerated it beyond all previous models. "The critical question isn't what caused it," he said, "but how long it will last. Our models suggest minimum 50 years, possibly centuries." This information transformed our perspective from short-term survival to long-term adaptation. If we were facing decades of extreme cold rather than a single deadly winter, our entire approach needed recalibration. That night, unable to sleep, despite exhaustion, I wandered to the cave entrance. The sky had cleared, revealing a spectacular array of stars brighter than I had ever seen them before, a consequence of the decreased atmospheric moisture. The northern lights danced across the horizon, their ethereal beauty a stark contrast to the deadly cold they heralded. As I stood watching, a figure joined me, Joseph, his lined face contemplative in the aurora's glow. "Your wolves are back," he said simply, gesturing toward the tree line below. I followed his gaze and saw them, 6 dark shapes moving with fluid grace across the snow. Even at this distance, I recognized Timber leading the pack, his distinctive gait unmistakable. "They're not my wolves," I replied, "but they may be our teachers." Joseph nodded, understanding what I meant without further explanation. "The old stories talk about times when humans learned from the four-legged ones how to survive when the world changed. Perhaps those times have returned." The wolves paused at the edge of the clearing below our cave entrance, looking up toward us. It wasn't coincidence. They were aware of our presence, had deliberately approached our territory. After a moment, Timber threw back his head and howled, the sound carrying crystalline and pure through the frozen air. The other wolves joined, creating a harmonic chorus that echoed across the valley. They're not just surviving, I realized aloud. They're thriving. While we humans had struggled to adapt, huddling in caves and rationing dwindling supplies, the wolves had discovered how to hunt in the new conditions, how to utilize the changed landscape to their advantage. Their social structure remained intact, their purpose clear, their methods effective. Joseph and I watched as the pack moved away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the aurora's glow. Their visit left me with a profound realization: our future in this frozen world wouldn't be secured through clinging to human exceptionalism, but through embracing our place within the natural order. The next morning, I proposed a radical shift in our approach to the settlement council. Drawing on what I had observed in the wolf pack and other surviving wildlife, I outlined a hybrid survival strategy, one that borrowed from animal adaptations while utilizing human technology and knowledge. We need to stop fighting the cold and learn to live within it, I explained, pointing to the maps we had created of the surrounding territory. Seasonal migrations between geothermal areas, hunting techniques adapted from predator patterns, social structures that prioritize group survival over individual comfort. Not everyone embraced these ideas immediately. Some clung to the hope of returning to something resembling our previous civilization. Others balked at what they perceived as a regression to primitive existence. But as Dr. Harrison's team shared more of their climate projections, the necessity of fundamental adaptation became undeniable. We were no longer temporary survivors waiting for rescue or for conditions to improve. We were the founding population of a new society, shaped by ice and isolation. Our decisions now would determine not just our immediate survival, but the culture that would carry humanity forward in this transformed world. As I looked around at the faces in our council chamber, determined, adaptable, alive despite impossible odds, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the freeze. Hope. Not for a return to what was lost, but for the emergence of something new, something perhaps more honest about our true place in the natural order. The wolves had shown us the way. Now we had to find the courage to follow it. My proposal to fundamentally change our survival strategy met with mixed reactions from the settlement council. Dr. Harrison and his research team provided data supporting my observations. The climate shift showed no signs of reversal, and conventional human infrastructure was failing catastrophically across the northern hemisphere. We can either adapt or perish, I concluded after presenting my case. The animals are showing us the way forward. We need to pay attention. Some council members argued that abandoning our cave settlement for a nomadic existence was too risky. Others worried about the psychological impact of embracing what they saw as a more primitive lifestyle. We're not regressing, I countered. We're evolving. Adaptation isn't weakness. It's the foundation of survival in changing conditions. Dr. Alvarez became my strongest ally in these discussions. Her scientific mind grasped the logic behind my proposals, while her medical training helped her understand the physiological aspects of adaptation. Our bodies are already changing, she pointed out during one heated debate. Increased metabolism, altered circulation patterns, enhanced cold tolerance. We're biologically adapting whether we choose to or not. Kestrel is suggesting we make conscious choices about that process rather than fighting it. After 3 days of deliberation, the council reached a compromise. We would maintain the cave settlement as our primary base but establish satellite camps near key geothermal areas, creating a network of resources across the territory. Teams would rotate between locations, maximizing access to different food sources and spreading our impact on any single area. As we began preparations, I sought out individual council members who had opposed my ideas, working to address their specific concerns. This approach, taking time to bring potential challengers into alignment rather than simply overriding their objections, was another lesson I'd learned from predator-pack dynamics. Force creates resistance. Inclusion creates cohesion. The TU most resistant was Marcus. a former military officer who had helped establish our security protocols. "You're asking people to behave like animals," he said bluntly when I approached him. "I'm asking them to remember that they are animals," I corrected. "Highly evolved, remarkably intelligent animals with unique capabilities, but still subject to the same natural laws as every other species." Our conversation continued for hours as I explained the biological basis for my proposals. Eventually, he began to see the pragmatic value in what I was suggesting, particularly regarding territory management and resource allocation. "I don't like it," he admitted finally. "But I can't argue with the logic. If this is what survival looks like now, then so be it." With the settlement's leadership aligned, we began the complex process of reorganizing our community. Dr. Harrison's team provided invaluable assistance, using their scientific equipment to map geothermal activity across our territory and identify optimal locations for satellite camps. Our first major challenge came when preparing for the initial relocation. We needed to transport essential supplies to the geyser basin site we had selected for our primary satellite camp, but the journey remained treacherous despite our improved cold weather techniques. "We need to move 20 people and critical supplies across 8 miles of extreme conditions," I explained to the planning committee. "The wolves do this regularly. We need to understand how." I proposed that I lead a small advance team to establish the route and basic shelter before bringing the main group. Joseph and 3 others volunteered to join me, all experienced in cold weather navigation. We set out at dawn, using the techniques I had observed in hunting predators, energy conservation, strategic rest periods, and maintaining optimal body temperature through controlled movement, rather than excessive clothing that caused sweating and subsequent dangerous cooling. The temperature remained around -60, but our improved gear and techniques made the journey manageable. We reached the geyser basin by midday and immediately began establishing shelter using the natural features of the area. Steam vents provided heat sources around which we constructed snow walls and ice block structures, a hybrid of traditional igloo techniques and modern engineering principles. As we worked, I noticed movement at the periphery of the basin. The wolf pack had returned, observing our activities from a safe distance. This time, I was certain it was Timber's pack. I recognized not only him, but several others I had treated at the Wildlife Center. "They're curious about what we're doing," Joseph observed, following my gaze. "They're assessing whether we're competition or potential allies," I corrected. "Territory and resource evaluation is instinctive for them." We continued our work while maintaining awareness of their presence. By evening, we had constructed a functional base camp capable of housing 20 people, utilizing the geothermal features to create a surprisingly comfortable microclimate. As darkness fell, I made a decision that others might have considered reckless. I prepared a small portion of our food, dried meat from our supplies, and walked toward the edge of our camp where the wolves had been observed. I placed the offering on a flat rock and retreated, maintaining eye contact with Timber, who watched from the tree line. "What are you doing?" Joseph asked quietly. "Establishing communication," I replied. "Not domestication, not taming, just communication between intelligent species with overlapping interests." We retreated to our shelter and continued preparations by firelight. Hours later, I checked the rock where I had left the offering. The meat was gone, and fresh wolf tracks circled our perimeter, investigative rather than threatening. The next morning, we were surprised to find a fresh killed rabbit placed precisely where I had left our offering. The wolves had responded to our communication with one of their own, a demonstration of their hunting prowess and perhaps an acknowledgement of shared territory. This unexpected development became the foundation for what would evolve into our most valuable survival adaptation. Not domestication of wolves as prehistoric humans had done, but a more equal arrangement between intelligent species, adapting to the same harsh conditions. When the main settlement group arrived the following day, I explained what had occurred. Some were skeptical, others frightened by the prospect of voluntary proximity to predators. Dr. Alvarez, however, immediately grasped the potential implications. "Symbiotic relationships develop naturally in extreme environments," she noted. Different species leveraging complementary strengths. It's a fundamental ecological principle. Over the next weeks, as we established our satellite camp and began developing sustainable foraging patterns, our unusual relationship with the wolf pack continued to evolve. They maintained their distance but remained visible, their hunting territories overlapping with our gathering routes in a way that seemed deliberate rather than coincidental. The breakthrough came during our third week at the Geyser Basin. A hunting party, including myself and Marcus, encountered a large moose. A remarkable find, as most large mammals had migrated south or perished in the initial freeze. The potential meat yield would sustain our camp for weeks, but bringing down such large prey with our limited weapons presented a significant challenge. As we debated our approach, I noticed movement in the trees nearby. Timber and 3 other wolves had positioned themselves around the moose in a classic hunting formation. They were waiting, not for the moose to move, but for us to act. They want to hunt with us, I realized aloud. They recognize we have the same target. Marcus looked skeptical but pragmatic. Can we coordinate with them somehow? Drawing on my knowledge of wolf hunting techniques, I outlined a strategy that would combine human and wolf approaches. We would drive the moose toward a natural bottleneck, where the wolves could more effectively attack, while we used our ranged weapons to injure and slow it. What followed was one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. Humans and wolves executing a coordinated hunt, each species leveraging its unique capabilities toward a common goal. The wolves demonstrated an uncanny ability to anticipate our movements, adjusting their positions to complement our driving tactics. When the moose finally fell, brought down by a combination of our spears and the wolves' precision attacks at hamstring and throat, both species maintained a respectful distance, neither rushing to claim the kill. I approached slowly, made a deliberate cut to open the abdominal cavity, then backed away. After several minutes, Timber led his pack forward to feed on the entrails, while we began processing the larger muscle groups. We had participated in an interspecies cooperative hunt of the kind that anthropologists had theorized might have occurred between early humans and wolves thousands of years ago, the precursor to domestication. But this was different. Neither species was attempting to control the other. We were simply leveraging mutual interests in a harsh environment where cooperation improved survival odds for both. When we returned to camp with the moose meat and related our experience, reactions ranged from disbelief to awe. The success, however, was undeniable. More protein secured with less risk than would have been possible for either species hunting alone. Dr. Harrison documented the event meticulously, recognizing its scientific significance. This could represent an evolutionary reset, he suggested, a return to cooperative adaptations that were common before technology isolated humans from natural systems. In the weeks that followed, similar cooperative hunts occurred with increasing frequency and refinement. We learned to read the wolves' signals, body postures, vocalizations, movement patterns, and they appeared to interpret ours with equal facility. Neither species encroached on the other's living space, but our hunting territories merged into a shared resource zone. Other partnerships developed as well. The settlement's dogs, originally pets or working animals, formed a bridge species between humans and wolves. Some integrated partially with the wolf pack during hunts while returning to human shelters afterward. These animals became valuable translators of behavior, helping each species better understand the other. Word of our unusual arrangement spread to other survivor communities through our occasional contact with travelers. Some dismissed the accounts as exaggeration or desperation. Others sent observers to learn our methods. A few attempted to replicate our approach with varying degrees of success. The most significant validation came when Carson reappeared after months of absence. He had survived against all odds, leading a small group of 10 people who had established a settlement 30 miles south of our territory. They were struggling, hungry, cold, constantly fighting the environment rather than adapting to it. We heard stories, he explained after we took his group in, his formerly antagonistic attitude replaced by haggard humility. People said you were living with wolves, hunting together. I didn't believe it until I saw it myself. He had observed one of our cooperative hunts from hiding, watching as humans and wolves brought down an elk together, then shared the kill, according to their established protocol. I thought you were crazy back at the center, he admitted. Now I see you were just ahead of the curve. You understood what was happening before the rest of us. Integrating Carson's group presented challenges, particularly teaching them our cooperative approach after they had spent months in a mindset of battling against nature. Some adapted more readily than others. A few never fully embraced the concept, maintaining a fearful distance from our wolf partners. As spring approached, though spring now meant temperatures rising to merely 0 rather than the deep negative readings of winter, we began preparing for the seasonal migrations I had proposed. The wolves were already showing signs of territorial expansion, ranging further from their winter denning areas as new food sources became accessible. Dr. Harrison's team confirmed what animal behavior had already indicated. The freeze was establishing seasonal patterns with marginal warming during summer months, creating temporary biological opportunities before the deep cold returned. We need to follow the energy, I explained to the settlement council. Move with the seasons just as the animals do. Maintain our cave base for deep winter, use the geyser camps during transition periods, and establish summer grounds where plant life can be cultivated during the brief growing window. This time, the council approved my proposal with minimal dissent. The successful winter at the geyser basin had demonstrated the validity of adaptation over resistance. We began mapping migration routes, establishing supply caches, and preparing for a mobile existence dictated by seasonal energy patterns rather than human convenience. As we prepared for this transition, I spent increasing time observing the wolf pack's behavior. They were already executing the seasonal shift we were planning, moving denning locations, expanding hunting territories, adjusting group dynamics to changing conditions. Their instinctive knowledge of energy efficiency and resource optimization provided a blueprint for our own adaptations. One evening, as I documented their movements from a ridge overlooking their new denning area, Timber separated from the pack and approached me directly. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough for direct eye contact but maintaining a respectful distance. For several minutes, we simply observed each other, two intelligent predators acknowledging a shared understanding of the changed world. Then he turned and loped back to his pack, pausing once to look back as if confirming I would follow. I did, maintaining a careful distance, and witnessed something remarkable. The pack had located a new geothermal feature, a hot spring previously unknown to us, hidden in a valley our surveys had overlooked. The wolves had established their spring denning site around this valuable resource. I marked the location and returned to our settlement with this critical information. The newly discovered hot spring became the centerpiece of our spring migration plan, offering a transition point between winter and summer territories. As the settlement prepared for its first major seasonal movement, I reflected on how dramatically our approach to survival had transformed over the months since the freeze began. We had moved from resistance to adaptation, from isolation to integration, from fighting nature to becoming part of it once again. The 53 humans who had survived the first 30 days of the Ice Age apocalypse were no longer just desperate survivors clinging to existence. We had become the founding population of a new human culture, one shaped by ice and isolation, but also by cooperation and adaptation. The knowledge we were developing would be passed to future generations, creating a society fundamentally different from the one that had been lost. Dr. Alvarez captured this transformation perfectly during our final council meeting before migration. "We haven't just survived the apocalypse," she said. "We've been remade by it." I thought of Timber and his pack, of how their ancient wisdom had shown us the path forward when our human certainties failed. The wolves hadn't changed their fundamental nature to survive the freeze. They had simply expressed it more purely, stripping away everything that didn't serve their continued existence. Perhaps that was the gift of catastrophe, the clarity that comes when everything non-essential is burned away by necessity. We humans had lost our civilization, our technology, our illusion of separation from natural systems. But we had rediscovered something more fundamental, our place within the community of life that had always sustained us, whether we acknowledged it or not. As we prepared to leave our winter shelter and follow the wolves' path toward spring territories, I found myself feeling something unexpected, not just hope for survival, but curiosity about what we might become in this transformed world. We were writing the first chapter of a new human story, one in which we were no longer the masters of nature but participants within it. The ice had changed everything, and in that change, despite all its brutality and loss, I had found a truth about my species that had long been forgotten. We were never meant to stand apart from the wild. We were meant to be part of it, intelligent, adaptable animals among others, finding our niche in the complex ecology of Earth. That realization, more than any technique or tool, would be the legacy of those first 30 days when the world froze solid, and we learned to live again.